We're going to be taking a look at this incredible 10th step. Hopefully, we're going to make enough sense out of the 10th step that it'll be something that everybody here will want to do and will take up as a part of their daily AA observance. 10th step was not in the original steps that were done by the founders. The steps that they followed were the steps of the Oxford group. And the way they eventually came down in terms of AA was the members had made some adjustments within the steps. But the 6 steps were this, and listen carefully for the omissions from what we have in our 12 steps. The first step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Second step, we got honest with ourselves. The third, we got honest with another person in confidence. The fourth, we made amends for harm done others. 5, we worked with other alcoholics without demand for prestige or money. And 6, we prayed to God to help us do these things as best we could. There are several holes there that were plugged by the 12 steps. For example, we see no second or third step there. We see the 4th and the 5th step. We see no 6th or 7th step. We see a 12th step. We see an 11th step. And one of the biggest omissions is the 10th step. There's no 10th step in here at all. And there's a reason for that. You see, the Oxfordians were a religious sect. And they had it in mind that being a religious sect and having their roots in what they considered to be first century Christianity, that they were in fact able to accomplish something of amazing grace. They believed that they were going to be able to arrive at a place of perfection by the use of their steps. Let me see now. They believed in 4 absolutes. In other words, they believed that working their 6 steps, one would become absolutely honest, absolutely pure, absolutely unselfish, and absolutely loving. Now, of course, that's a bid for sainthood, I suppose. And our guys fell for this for a long time. They thought that these folks must know what they're talking about. And a lot of people were getting sober using those 6 steps. But they rapidly began to find out that they needed more, and that there was a fatal flaw in these 6 steps, especially for the alcoholics, because alcoholics were under a sentence of death. For them, it's pretty grim to do things right. And so they began to realize that this hole had to be filled. Now, when we look back, if you want to turn your books back to 13 just for a second, because this will give us an idea of what was really happening with AA, and we'll see the real big blank spot here in the AA program as it existed at that time. Page 13, we find 3 paragraphs there which illustrate the steps that Bill took while he was in the hospital. I suspect that much of this is history being filled in, but nevertheless it illustrates the first 3 years of sobriety in AA and what the program, the word-of-mouth program, then really consisted of. Remember, when Bill came to the hospital for the last time, he had already worked his 1st and 2nd steps. And so now we find in the 2nd full paragraph, we find the 3rd step, a humble offer to God. Then we find the fourth step, ruthlessly face my sins. We find the sixth step, became willing to have my newfound friend taken away, root and branch. The admission that for the first time myself I was nothing, without him I was lost. My schoolmate visited, I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. There we see the fifth step. Made a list of people I'd hurt, and we do that in our fourth step, and in our eighth step I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, again the fourth and eighth step, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters the utmost of my ability, and this is the ninth step, of course. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within, which leads us now to the 11th step. Common sense would be thus uncommon sense, and so forth. I would sit quietly when in doubt. There's our meditation, asking for direction and strength to meet my problems. Never was I to pray for myself. Again, this is all 11-step stuff now. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. So now what we have seen is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. And then if we turn over the page, on page 14, the last full paragraph on page 14, while I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others. So we see the genesis of the 12th step. At least 12-step work was popping up right here in the beginning. And so that teaches us that there was a big hole. Even as they had worked out the what they needed to do with the Oxford 6 steps, and gradually over a period of time develop more and more steps to fill in those gaping holes. But there was one step that was missing, and it was missing primarily because the Oxfordians had insisted upon the coming of some kind of perfection, this absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. But our guys found out in those 3 years before they wrote the big book that the world and all of its people would continue to threaten them, and that they would respond to that threat with fear. And they had already found out that fear is the driving force behind anger and resentment. Also the driving force behind selfishness and dishonesty. And so what they found was that their defects of character, which they thought had been taken from them, were cropping back up because they were not yet so fully imbued with God's grace. Their faith was not strong enough, and therefore they were feeling threat, and they were feeling fear, and fear was warping their natural instincts again, as it had in the past. So they had to say to themselves, what am I going to do? What are we going to do about this? We thought that we had gotten rid of all this stuff. Now, the thought crossed their minds, as it often is stated these days by New Age AAers, that God just simply didn't take away all their defects. Almost like, ha ha ha, you think He's going to do that? No, 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 it's going to be slow. It's a process, honey. And they're only going to disappear over time, but only if you work on them. But that isn't, they discarded that. But these people were smart enough and imbued enough with spiritual beliefs that they understood that if we, as human beings, put any limitations on God's power, those limitations will come true. The minute I begin to say, God ain't going to do that for me, even worse, can't do it, won't do it, isn't going to do it, it doesn't get done. Because our mind closes down. In order for us to be given the grace, we've got to be open to the grace. We get the miracles, we're open to the miracles. And when we close our minds to them, they just don't appear. And so, a self-fulfilling prophecy is the way it turned out to be. Well, these guys avoided that. They said, no, as with everything else, it's still up to us. If it's to be, it's up to me. I've got to take the appropriate action to invoke God's power to help me with my human problems and my spiritual problems. Now, how do we go about doing that? First of all, what are we dealing with here? Well, we're dealing with the recurrence of those things which block us off from God. And remember when we got through with our third step, that we were going to have to immediately face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us from God. Therefore, fourth step, fifth step, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth steps. Get rid of the defects of character, get rid of the insanities, and get rid of the guilt, remorse, and shame, all of which block me from God. Now, if these things have come back, and they do, and they will, what does that mean? It means I'm blocked from God. What does that mean for me? It means I'm vulnerable. Why? Because I am still as powerless today as I was when I came in over alcohol. I can't stop drinking on my own. I need God's power. I need to stay in God's pocket. And if I do not do so, I become vulnerable. Therefore, I must stay spiritually fit. In order to stay spiritually fit, I have to stay free of the things that block me. And when we begin to think of it in terms of A, B, and C, 1, 2, and 3, it all makes sense. It's not some far-out metaphysical equation. It's just a straight line, A, B, C. Thank you, Gene, very much. Now then, look at it from that standpoint. What's the problem? All these things that are cropping back up, we've already learned to deal with, haven't we? When we got to the fourth step, it said to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which block us from God. Our defects, our insanities, and our guilts. Well, what did we do to be freed from these things that we carried in with us? We did an inventory, fourth step. We admitted what we found in our fourth step, in our fifth step, to another human being and to God and ourselves. Then we took what we had found to be defects to God and asked Him to remove them, and He did. And having made a list of the people we had harmed, we went out to make amends, to set matters straight, and we did that too. As a result of all of this, we entered the world of the Spirit, we became God-conscious, we had a spiritual awakening, and we were restored to sanity. Do we think that we are therefore through with all this nonsense? We can quit, we don't have to go do anything more? Well, that was pretty much the idea the Oxfords had, but it didn't work for us. So now let's take these same tools that we've been taught to use, and which we used successfully. They worked when we used them. We learned how. And we learned that when we used them, they worked. They're still in our toolkit, a simple kit of spiritual tools handed to us when we walked in the door. So now let's take out the old toolkit and put it back to work. This is what they were thinking. This is what they did. And as a matter of trial and error, by word of mouth, the 10th step evolved out of sheer necessity. Now the 10th step is a step of inspired genius, because what it does is to permit you and me, as we go through each day, to be free from the things that block us from God. Each day, hour by hour. And then, to make sure we did it, we've got 11th step with an inventory that looks back on the day to say, aha, now Jim, look back and see if you did these things that the 10th step instructs you to do. Because if you didn't do them, now you got to clean up your act tonight. So we got a double whammy here. And it all comes down to this one basic fact of life, that the world and its people will continue to threaten us, and threat equals fear, and fear equals the warping of our natural instincts, which means the recurrence, the cropping back up, as the big book says, of defects. They're not the old ones. They have the same name. They have a new genesis. They come from new sources. There's something more going on in our lives, more or different, which is created through the process of threat and fear, resentment, anger, rage, dishonesty, selfishness, self-seeking, self-centeredness, self-delusion, self-pity. Self-pity turns out to be one of those really sneaky little, excuse the expression, bastards. It just comes up on us, and it feels so good sometimes, and we rationalize it away, because self-pity allows us to blame everybody else and circumstances and even God instead of looking at ourselves, which we don't want to do. And the human solution is foster self-pity, because they make sure we understand that it isn't our fault. They want us to feel good, so we don't have to really face the truth about ourselves. Oh, you weren't so bad. Let me tell you about myself. I was much worse than you. So what? Big Book never indulges itself in comparative fault, never. Because the purpose here is for us to look honestly and fearlessly at ourselves, to find out what it is that's wrong with us, so that we can ask God to take it away, and so that we can make those appropriate amends which will shrive us of our guilt. And guilt is just as bad as resentments and anger and fear. Guilt is always fear-driven. Anything that keeps us from being in close personal contact with God is extremely dangerous for us. All we have to do to remember that, and again, this is all very straight line stuff. Boom, 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 boom. A, B, C, D equals. All the way back in the third step, we found out that God will give us everything we need. But we have to stay close to Him. And we have to perform His work well. And anything that blocks us off from God has got to go. And whatever we need to do each day to see to it that that happens, we must do. It may not be a matter of survival for this week or this month or even this year, but ultimately it's a matter of survival for you and me. But even more than that, it's a matter of claiming our heritage, to be happy, joyous, and free. To not be walking around through these rooms, leaving big muddy footprints as we try to go through life with untreated alcoholism. A lot of us were better off when we were drinking. Except that, of course, alcohol was tearing our brains and our bodies apart. And so here we have the 10th step, which pops right up and has been really outstanding in practice for it's being ignored. People just simply don't want to do it. And yet here's a tool which came out of dire necessity, works like a charm, and has a follow-up where if I'm doing my work properly and following directions, I'm going to have to look back tonight and see if I did my 10th step today. And after a while, I'm probably going to get tired of having to say, no, I didn't. I didn't have time. So now then, we're looking at a step which incorporates 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And bridges over to 12. All of these steps are incorporated in the one step, the 10th step, to be used every day. One more thing which should solidify our understanding of what this is all about. When we read the 12th step, the third part of the 12th step tells us that we are to practice these principles in all of our affairs. These principles means these steps, the 12 steps. The 10th step does exactly that. It puts them right there in one step, in one format for us to use every day as we go through the day. Big Book says that our spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. How do we live a spiritual way of life? We should have learned by now. It isn't by being good. It's by doing the work. Leading a spiritual way of life means staying clear of the things which block us from God, staying close to Him, and performing His work well. That's the spiritual way of life. And we have all the tools to do that. We just need to use them. Let's go to page 84 and see what this 10th step is. There's much more in this paragraph than the 10th step. 10th step constitutes about 7 lines. The rest of the paragraph is quite instructive in other aspects. Let's start out. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any mistakes as we go along. Now, take the word continue and ask yourself, what does that mean? What does that refer to? Continue from what? Well, obviously the 4th step, right? What else have we done that would be recognizable as an inventory? So we're going to continue the efforts that we started in our 4th step. The 4th step was taken how? In our heads? No, we wrote it down. We already found out that we take inventory in writing. We don't try to take inventory in our heads. Some people may be genius enough to do that, but by and large, most of us are incapable of doing that over any length of time. So we get a notebook. Just a little book like this. Mine's kind of been used, as you can see. And when something comes up during the day, we write it down. Doesn't have to be more than 2 or 3 words. Something to get out of my head and get it down on paper. Now I can deal with it. Continue to take personal inventory. And continue to set right any mistakes as we go along. That's a continuation of the 4th and of the 8th and 9th steps, isn't it? So now we thought we were through making amends. No. We just learned how. Being human beings who are living in the real world most of the time, hopefully, we're going to find that we step on people's toes occasionally. We react badly occasionally. And we need to make amends quickly. We need to use our tools of our 8th and 9th step. Why? Wouldn't it be kind of nice if we could stop doing that stuff? Just flail around like a bull in a china shop for a while without having to feel guilty about it? Well, that would be great, except we do feel guilty. And guilt blocks us from God. So we've got to be sure that we stay free of guilt. And to do that, it's critically important for us to be willing to make amends. So this sets the stage. Continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. Now this next sentence tells us when we start doing this. Remember that the step which came just before this was the 9th step, in which we were busy making amends, trying to set matters straight. But we also found out that in the process of making amends in the 9th step can take the rest of our lives in some cases. And there are many people we may not be able to find now. In other words, it is not possible in most cases, to complete our amends in any reasonable period of time. And we have to make sure that we accommodate the 12 steps to that very fact, and that's what the steps have done. When do we start working our 10th step? Here's what it says. We vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. The word as means during the time that we are cleaning up the past, we go to our 10th step and begin living the 10th step and the 11th step and the 12th step. That's what it means. As a practical matter, it's probably good practice to make several amends and then get your sponsor to sit down with you and go over the 10th and 11th steps and show you how to work them, and then get busy doing it. We would want to cut our teeth on making amends before we launch into the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps. But we're going to do that very thing as we clean up the past. We may be making these amends for a long time, but we sure as heck aren't going to sit around waiting to do those 3 vital steps which keep us growing spiritually until whatever amends we have to make are finished. No, we don't do that. The big book and the steps do not require us that we do something foolish, or in many cases impossible. So we commence this way of living. Please notice that phrase, this way of living. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. That's what that means. This way of living refers to these 10th, 11th, and 12th steps. These are the only steps we need, because they incorporate within them all the other steps. And they look forward, they don't look backward. And if we take inventory every day, we never have to take another inventory the rest of our lives in the 4th step sense, because nothing ever gets ahead of us. We always know what our present reality is. We've been writing it down every day. If you're keeping a journal, you can go back to your journal, you'll see your Pilgrim's Progress as it goes all the way through your life in sobriety. It's all there. If you are staying honest, if you are doing the work thoroughly, if you're answering the questions honestly and thoroughly, you will find that nothing ever gets ahead of you. You always know what's going on. Now what's happened? We've come to the 10th step. In our 4th step, we found out that we were blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit by our resentments. Remember that? And now we've done the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th steps. And what's happened? We have entered the world of the Spirit. We're no longer blocked. This is where we have to be, free of the things which block us from God. If we wish to recover, we have to make sure that that the door is always open, and that there's room in the inn. And that means that we stay as free of self as we possibly can, to leave as much God room as we can. Gradually, that God can take over the whole place. At first it may be a little crowded in there. But we learn how to be free of self as we go. We have entered the world of the Spirit because the things which have blocked us from the world of the Spirit are gone. We've got to keep it that way. Remember, this is all very straight line stuff. And we're going to see in a little while that it all works automatically if we do the work. Back to page 84, please. So we have found that having come this far and having reached the 10th step, we have now entered the world of the Spirit. 6 lines down from the beginning of that middle paragraph. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Did you ever stop to wonder what those two words mean in this paragraph and in this context? Understanding of what? Effectiveness in what pursuit? If you think about it, the answer is obvious. Where do we see the word understanding or understand? We see it in the steps, don't we? God of my understanding, God as we understood Him. This means precisely that we're to grow in our understanding of God. And we're going to do that through the practice of the 10th and 11th and 12th steps. I believe it was Henry Ford who said, "When I hear it, I'm interested. When I see it, I believe it. When I experience it, I understand it." Now, if we take that as our guide, then we see that the understanding that we must achieve of God is our experience of God. And how is that going to come about? Simply because we've taken one leap of faith after another. We have permitted God to come in. We've invited God into our lives. We started that invitation back in the 3rd step, didn't we? And as we go through the steps over and over again, we're given the same direction, the same instruction. We ask God in. We turn to Him. We trust Him in all things. Bill said, "Turn in all things to the Father of light." As we go through the steps, we see one direction after another which leads us to turn to God. And our sponsors, or if we're fortunate to have somebody in our lives who knows what they're doing, are telling us that if you do this, you'll be amazed at the results. And so even though we don't know why we're doing it precisely, we're not sure what the results are going to be, we do it anyway. And then the miracle comes. And we say, "Wow, that worked." And then we do it again, and again, and again. And every time we do that and experience God, we come closer to the God of our understanding. For most of us, the God of our understanding is the God we've experienced. We may have some ethereal picture of God that's been drawn for us by others, or maybe something from our imaginations, or perhaps we are one of those few who has some kind of an epiphany, a bright light experience, and we therefore have a clearer picture perhaps of what we believe God is. But our understanding of God is almost entirely dependent upon our experiencing of Him. And we get that experience because we take the steps and work the steps and take the action. Remember that will always materialize if we work for Him. That's the promise. So now when we read that sentence, we see that the 10th step is a step which, along with the 11th and 12th steps, enables us to grow in our understanding of God. Obviously, there's a corollary to this understanding, which is faith, and the growth of faith, and the growth of trust. Now, what about this effectiveness? Well, we have a clue for that too. Especially on page 77. Let's take a look. Right at the top of the page. The third line. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. Go back one page to 76 in the 7-step prayer. Second full paragraph. I pray you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. And we see this over and over again, but these are two prime examples. The 3rd step prayer is another one. We ask God to take away our difficulties so we can be an example to others of His power, His love, and His way of life working in and through us so that we can be helpful to them. That's the effectiveness that this little sentence is talking about. Effectiveness in doing what? In carrying the message. And being examples of God's power, His love, and His way of life working in and through us so that others can be helped. So that they can truthfully say, I want what you have. And therefore I'm willing to go to any length to get it. You see how this all works? So the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps are going to help us to grow in our understanding of God and in our effectiveness in carrying God's message to others. And when we see it from that standpoint, that little sentence makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Next sentence. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Whoa, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that I'm going to have to continue to do this stuff the rest of my life? I don't get to have a quick and dirty fix here, finish the 12 steps. You know, you always hear around the rooms, well, you can chair a meeting when you finish the 12 steps. Stop and think about it. There's no such thing as finish the 12 steps. Practice these principles in all of our affairs tells us exactly the opposite, doesn't it? We're never finished with them. Any more than if you were a Cadillac repairman, a mechanic in the back there in the Cadillac garage, and they had taught you how to use all the tools in the Cadillac garage. Could you then say, I'm finished with the tools? No, you're just beginning. You learn how to use them. Now start fixing Cadillacs, dummy. You see, what it means to work the 12 steps is to learn how to use the tools in our spiritual toolbox. And from here on, we are going to use them every day. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Now, when we look at it from that standpoint, we realize that we have not come into something which is going to offer us a vacation down the line, days off with pay, of course, is what we want, sick time, any of that. You go on a cruise ship, you will immediately find friends of Bill. They're on every cruise ship. And people who don't know who they are, who take multiple cruises every year, are absolutely eaten alive with curiosity. Who are these friends of Bill? Are on every ship we go on. They got to be the richest people in the world. If you're in France, if you're in Russia, if you're in Indochina, if you're in Australia, if you're in Suriname, if you're in South America, you will find other alcoholics who meet just as we do. It's amazing. They can be speaking a language that you know nothing about, and as you sit in that meeting, you'll understand pretty much everything that's going on. Because it's the language of the heart. We all learn to speak that language. So there are no days off, there are no vacations. As a matter of fact, as we go through the day, if we keep in mind the imprimatur, which is that we are to practice these principles in all of our affairs, and that the spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. then we see what the real parameters of this whole thing are. We're learning a new way of life. So it's no longer a matter of us working something strange or doing something outside of what we would normally do. It becomes what we do. Now, that's why the 12 steps work. Because the 12 steps are great spiritual principles restated as steps of action. Which means that when we incorporate these steps into our lives and we actually live our lives in accordance with the steps, that we have also incorporated these spiritual principles into our very being. They become part of us. They become literally the way we live our lives. Now, this may sound like it's a bit far-fetched to you, and I hope it does not. It's easily obtainable by anybody who's willing to do the work. But it means being dedicated to the proposition that this is an everyday affair, that we take care of our AA business and we take care of our spiritual business every day. First priority. Then you'll hear people get up here at the podium and they will announce vociferously that they have just decided to balance their life. Their bright-eyed friends have told them that they are becoming way, way too addicted to AA. They're becoming meeting junkies. And they're going to have to balance their lives. And when I hear that, I give them about 6 weeks before they drink again. Stop and think about it. What does it mean if I say I'm going to balance my life? Doesn't that mean I'm taking over? I'm making the decisions. But didn't we make up our minds and promise God that we were going to let Him take over our lives? I offer my life to Thee, we say in the third step, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. No reservations there of any kind. Bill says, turn in all things to the Father of light. The moment I decide that this is too damn much, I'm not letting these AA gurus and big book thumpers control my life anymore. If I want, I'm going to go to as, you ever hear this one? I'm going to go to as many meetings as I need. Hey, that would be wonderful if you only understood that that one day at a time means, among other things, you got to a meeting today. Where else are you going to carry the message? Where else are you going to find the people who need your help? Where else are you going to get your daily ration of spiritual resuscitation? I asked my sponsors early on, what does one day at a time mean? They said, today means today I went to a meeting, today I prayed, today I meditated, today I took inventory, and today I worked with another alcoholic. And they promised me if I lived my life that way, I would be just fine. And they were right. And that was 38 and a half years ago. And I'm still doing it. I got to tell you, that doesn't make any kind of a hero out of me. It's just my way of life. It's the way I live my life. I found that it really works. Why would you throw away something that works in favor of something your bright-eyed friends are suggesting? What in the hell do they know? I would ask them, gee, that's a good suggestion, but tell me, where is that in the big book? This business of balancing my life? This business of only going to enough meetings that I need? And by the way, where's God in that equation? It's not in the big book, and God's not there. Don't you think you can pretty safely ignore it? Of course you can. So now we've come to the moment of truth here. That is, in this paragraph, we now have come to those few lines which define the 10th step. Go back on page 84 now, right in the middle of that paragraph. Continue to watch for. Continue to watch means to continue to take inventory of what? Oh gosh, our old friends. Selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. The 4 cardinal defects. The same ones we found when we did our 4-step. They haven't changed. We've gone from the 4th to the 10th step, and we find the same rascals are sitting right here, coming back to bite us, because fear has come back, and we have to be able to deal with this every day. We're going to continue to watch, which means continue to inventory, write it down, selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Do we have any more evidence that these are the 4 cardinal defects? Certainly. Turn the page over to page 86. First full paragraph. We're now in step 11. We're now looking at the first full paragraph at the 11th step inventory. What are the first 4 questions? Today was I resentful? Today was I selfish? Today was I dishonest? Today was I afraid? Same 4 defects. Same things we found in the 4th step. They're repeated in the 10th step and again in the 11th step. Why? Because that's the way the 12 steps work. You say, well, wait a minute. Where in the heck are all of these 7 deadly sins? They're not there. Sin isn't any part of the AA program. It may be in some of our literature, influenced by various ecclesiastics, one in particular who had a lot of influence, but it's not in the big book. And sin cannot be a part of AA anyhow, because sin is as defined religiosity, and we don't practice religion here. Now, there are plenty of people in AA who do recognize sin as they are taught in their respective churches, and that's fine. That's wonderful. But for AA, we look at something entirely different from sin. It may very well be that our actions have been sinful, but we're not looking here at that. We're looking here at twisted minds. We're looking at God-given natural instincts which have been warped and perverted by fear. The instincts for sex and security and society. And because these things are instinctual, they operate below the level of conscious thought. Therefore, we have no power over them. It is instinctual for me to wish to be accepted by my group. It's instinctual for me to wish not to be shunned. It's instinctual for me to wish to be thought highly of and thought kindly of and accepted and included in instead of pushed out. It's a powerful instinct, the instinct for society. But it doesn't require that I think about it at all. It's just there. And that's a lizard brain we're talking about. This is back in the medulla oblongata. Came out of the primordial ooze. This stuff is so ancient and so powerful, and it is not amenable to our upper brain functions. We can't think our way out of it. Think about the sex instinct. Is that not lizard brain? Do you have to stop and think, ooh, golly, I'm really attracted to him. Maybe I better get sexually aroused. Ooh, now I'm going to get sexually aroused. And then we push certain buttons in our heads and our sexual arousal starts. No, that happens. It happens because it's instinctual. We don't control it. It's just as silly for me to say to Doc over there, Doc, don't drink. As for Doc to say to me, Jim, Stop getting those wild sexual daydreams about that beautiful woman. I can't any more help that than he can help drinking. I got to have help with my instincts that have gone screwy. They're goofy. They're crazy. My mind is out of control. That's why we say when we come in here, we're nuts. We are. Our natural instincts have been warped and perverted by fear, so they no longer work as God intended. We are not rational about this stuff. We cannot be rational. That's why we have no power over these defects, because they don't operate in the realm in which our power would be effective. That's why we have to have God's help with them, because they are beyond our reach. And when it says that we're going to be restored to sanity, and we will be, this means that God has put those natural instincts back into order, where they're supposed to be. And only He can do that. We can't. And no damn psychiatrist or psychologist or facilitator or a bunch of pills or electroshock therapy is going to do it either. It just doesn't happen that way. We're not dealing with a connectivity here that's going to work on that level. That's why when we look at the problems we have, the problems revolve around a sick mind. And we can't cure a sick mind with a sick mind. And there isn't any other human solution out there that'll work either. And that goes right to the heart of everything that's wrong with us, which is that we are spiritually bankrupt. And we're spiritually bankrupt because our minds don't work right. And we have no power to change that ourselves, but God does, and He will. And that's why we work the steps, so that God can come into our lives and set matters straight, so that our natural instincts will be back in order where they belong. And not only does that happen, but our fears are ameliorated by God's power. And it is our fears which have been our enemy all along. It's the only enemy we have. We always think there are all these enemies out there. There's only one, it's fear. And if there is a devil, his name is fear. So you see what's happening here is that we're continuing this process of utilizing these tools to invoke God's power to be free of those things which block us from Him, and those things which block us from Him are all products of fear, and they relate to our natural instincts over which we have no power. Therefore, ergo, we must have God's power in order to be set free from these things. Period. It's just that simple. It's 1, 2, 3. The beautiful thing about it is that we don't have to worry about it. All we have to do is do the work, because the results are automatic. If we had to think our way through this, philosophize our way through this, make up all kinds of ways of ameliorating these problems, we'd never make it. But we've been given something which God inspired, and He said, okay, this is the way it'll work. Remember, when you get to the fifth step, what's it tell you? Our fears fall from us. They're gone. They're gone. Now, additional threats create additional fear. But as we experience God, our faith grows, and faith cancels out fear. And there comes a time in your recovery when you seldom have any fear at all. There comes a time in our recovery when we recognize that to be fearful is to insult God. Because we're really saying, God, I don't trust you. And so the first thing we have to do is we have to write down these defects when they crop up again. Then it tells us when these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. Wow, that's right to the seventh step, isn't it? We wrote them down, and now we're asking God to take them away. We discuss them with somebody immediately. Oh, there's the fifth step. So we write it down, we talk to somebody about it, and we ask God to take it away. And then we make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. There's the ninth step. All this is happening as we're going through the day. You say, well, wait a minute. I'm at work. I'm in the middle of a computer program, or I'm trying to build a house, or whatever it is. How am I supposed to tell somebody about this immediately? How am I supposed to find time to write it down? How long does it take to write down, Jim made me mad? What? 10 seconds? How long does it take to say to God, God, please take away this resentment of Jim, and then get back to work? How long does it take? Do you ever stop to take care of bodily functions, which can be usually done in private? There's time. See, we like to give ourselves excuses why we don't do this stuff. Many of us are very, very, very loath to write anyway. We just don't want to do it. We're not used to it. We don't want to do it. We have to force ourselves to do it. So now we have seen the 4th step, 5th step, 7th step, and 9th step, all included here in the 10th step. And then what else? Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. The 12th step. Now, why would we do that? Well, there are all kinds of clues, but let's find one of them that sticks in mind particularly. Go back to page 70. All right, here's one of the most difficult things we all face in recovery, and that's our sex life, our sex inventory, and our sex life, and our relationship life. Nothing causes more difficulty in recovery in AA than boy-girl problems. Count on it. Relationships, just because they distract us from our recovery, they involve such violent human emotions, jealousy, the most terrible human emotion, feelings of rejection, feelings of shame, guilt, remorse, all that stuff, and they pile in on us. And if we're not taking good care of them and taking care of ourselves, they pile down to a point where they become insupportable. Now, we do have a solution, but you see, again, it's important for us to be willing to use it. In the second full paragraph, a little over halfway down the page, if sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. Why? Because this takes us out of ourselves. See, the problem is always self. It quiets the imperious urge, when to yield would mean heartache. The imperious urge means just what we were talking about a few minutes ago. This powerful human, natural God-given instinct for sex. It's much stronger than we are. The imperious urge, the imperium, imperial Rome. Genghis Khan going through the steppes and into the lowlands. I mean, you name it. Imperium. Nothing can stand before. We don't have the power to deal with this on our own. Our bright-eyed friends will always be telling us we do. Why don't you this and why did you do that? Well, thank you for sharing. Put yourself in my shoes and then ask the same question. The problem there is that the question was wrong. The question should be, why didn't you throw yourself harder into helping others? Not, why didn't you stop doing what you were doing? Because we do have a solution. It takes us out of ourselves. Getting out of self means that we have a fighting chance then of dealing with something with a bit of rationality. So we discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly we've harmed anyone, and then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Now, this business of helping others constitutes one of 3 tools that we're given to stay out of self. And we have to do that. Let's go back to basics again. What did we learn back there in the 3rd step? Our problems, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though she usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we have to be rid of self. and selfishness. We have to, or it kills us. Because it blocks us from God. You see, if we don't have God in our lives, we can't stop drinking. If we can't stop drinking, we're going to die. It's a straight line proposition again, isn't it? And self and selfishness and self-centeredness and self-pity and self-delusion block us from God. Now, we can't get rid of self on our own. We need His help. But if we invoke God's help, He does help us, and we are able to get rid of self. But we're given 3 tools to use as we go through the rest of our lives. 1, as we go through each day, we do what Bill said we must do. We turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. This means as we go through the day, we constantly remind ourselves that we're not running the show. God, what do you want me to do next? What's my next step to be? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are thoughts, the big book says, which must go with us constantly. The proper use of our willpower is to make ourselves, to will ourselves, to take this action of surrender. God, what do you want me to do next? When we do that, we are filled with peace and serenity that we never had before, because we're putting the results in God's hands, and we are offering to do those things which He wants us to do, to follow directions, to be obedient. So, as we do that, we go through each day with that prayer. Secondly, we stay out of self as we meditate. Meditation is surrender. And in meditation, we surrender. And one of these days, on a Sunday, you and I are going to do some meditation together. We get into the 11th step. And we'll see how all of that works. So meditation is another tool. And then the third tool is one we're just talking about here. Working with other people, carrying the message, turning your thoughts resolutely to someone you can help. See what you can put back into life instead of taking from life. And these are all actions that we have to take, and each of these actions is designed for us to stay in a state of surrender. Not to give in to the lizard brain, but to live a spiritual way of life. You think, boy, this is an awful lot. But you know, it really isn't. Because these are all things that become a part of your life. If you practice them for a while, they become the way you live your life. Just as there are a jillion things we each do every day and don't even think about it. George Bernard Shaw said, the average human being thinks constructively once a week. I have made an international reputation for myself by thinking constructively 3 times a week. We are creatures of reflex and habit. Just think what it would be if you were driving down I-95 and you had to think, okay, now that car is cut in front of me, what do I do? Oh yes, I have to put my foot on the brake and push down on the brake pedal, and I should turn the wheel which way? Left? Well, I guess to the left. And by this time you'd been in an accident for the last 30 seconds. You see, so much of life is exactly that way. So what do? We just simply retrain ourselves to do the right thing, to do those things which will help us grow spiritually. And that takes a little bit of practice. And it takes a little bit of repetition. And it takes a sponsor who knows what the hell he or she is doing to get us to do it, to monitor our progress, to urge us and encourage us to do it, and also to show by his or her actions that he or she practices what he or she preaches. Because we're going to learn from what we see others do. Monkey see, monkey do. Not only that, but as we see that our sponsors do what they tell us to do, we gain more and more confidence in them. If I wish to help you recover, I need to be an example to you of what I'm talking about. And how many people do we find these days who do that? Not many. But everybody in this room can be just that person. All it takes is you decide that's what you're going to do. That you are not going to get left behind spiritually. Nobody gets left behind who doesn't want to be. And finally, this really, really, really important final sentence of 8 words. Love and tolerance of others is our code. Now, code is not an, oh, golly gee whiz, it would be sort of nice if we kind of did it. It's a rule. It's a very powerful rule. Code. Love and tolerance of others are code. Now, this does not mean an attitude of love or an attitude of tolerance. It means being loving and being tolerant, acting with love, acting with tolerance. And we do that even though we don't feel like it, even though we don't want to do it, even though we can argue that this person doesn't deserve it. We still do it. Because thought follows action. If you want to eventually end up loving the person you used to hate, you pray for them and you treat them with loving kindness, and you'll find that you eventually come to love them. Perhaps not as a human, but at least with God's love. Because remember, we're trying here to emulate God's love for all men and women. And it is only through loving action that can come about. Thought follows action. So this means that we act with love and we act with tolerance. Be tolerant. Be loving. And sooner or later, those sterling qualities become yours if you do it. This takes us away from bickering, fighting, gossiping, lying, all those things that are destructive. We just don't do that stuff anymore. We give it up. Remember that love is an action, just as faith is an action. Faith without works is dead. Love without the action of love is nothing at all, just a bunch of electrons chasing each other around your brain. How many times have you talked to people who found themselves in terrible trouble and they haven't been able to break loose from, say, a crushingly disastrous relationship, and the first thing you hear from them is, oh, but I love him. Oh, but I love him. Love is not enough. Loving action is love. Tolerance is not a state of mind. Tolerance is being tolerant. Tolerance without the action of tolerance is dead. Love without loving action is dead. Faith without works is dead. See, everything that we have in our big book and everything that we have in our 12 steps is action. It's what we do, not what we think, not what we fantasize, not what we have accepted from others as being truth, but what we know to be the truth because we've experienced it. And we experience the truth because we work. We do the work. And when the more you read the big book and the more you follow the steps, the more you'll realize that the steps are all based upon the actions we take. Not what we think. State of mind becomes irrelevant without the appropriate action to back it up. We've got 3 paragraphs here that tell us where we've come to, what we need to do from now on, and again what we've come to, and these are extremely important. They blow out of the water most of the mythology that's floating around these rooms about how we recover and all kinds of stuff, so it should be interesting. I want to thank you all so much for being here and letting me share this with you. And who'd like to do the chips today? Somebody come on up.
Hey everybody, I'm Happy-Go-Lucky Alcoholic.
Oh wow.
And Henry Ford also said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. So
Yeah, well, that Yogi Berra said, if you come to a fork in the road, take it.
that's true. This is the way of life. This is the best move I've ever made, and it will be the best move you ever made if somebody wants to start this wonderful new way of life. It's from today till 12:01. Okay, well, if you're shy, we'll leave it right there. Next we have this beautiful garnet, or no, actually burgundy, for 90 days. Okay.
Garnet's okay.
Garnet,
Yeah, it's okay.
thank you.
Yeah, you can use that.
And this beautiful blue. Well, you know something? We got to give ourselves a round of applause. We're not going to drink today. I know. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. That was excellent. Let's close this meeting. Go have a happy Easter. Let this circle represent the unity of our fellowship. Let's have a moment of silence for those who are still suffering. And then we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. Thank you. Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
We'd always like to change them, you know, but we can't. But we can, with God's help, change ourselves.
So how did they get out? How did they pay for it? How did
Everybody has to struggle with the same thing. What's your name?
you get paid?
My name's Jim. It's one of the universal curses of humankind,
Sounds interesting.
and it's all fear-driven. And when you write it down, you'll see the threats and you'll see the fear.
You just went out there.
And when you attack your problems through your fears, and the fears go away, you find the problems dissolve.
Our government.
You're afraid of losing something you have, or not getting something you want or need, or
Qualified skills. I'm sure.
rejection or failure.
Jungle things you haven't seen. Yeah.
And all of those are normal fears that we get because of the threats that
Also, they
we
didn't want you
experience.
because they were doing the age discrimination.
But God will take those
So how did
fears
you
from
guys get
you.
around that?
You write them down,
You threatened them, didn't you?
you tell somebody about them, and then you ask God to
Well,
move
I
them.
here, Sparky. You let me in, right? Did you see all the different jungle
fifth,
things Jen's seen in a while?
In 7 steps, and they never fail, but you have to do it. It's kind of like a little equation. The fear recognized and written down and discussed with another person,
How'd you
turned over to God.
You can't see anything exotic?
But you got to do the work.
So much of this, like, holding on.
110 in the shade with 2,000 degrees.
The problem there is almost always the false comfort of self-justification. But that's a total blind alley. Because even though you may be fully justified, you still feel like hell.
Malaria bad? How'd you do it? Did you do okay yourself?
So what's the point of doing
You
that?
got all your shots.
And that's old behavior, you know. It's the way we always lived our lives. People have taught us to do that, but they're wrong. Terrible way to live your life. Now then, order in the court. Order in the court. Would you ask the Half Measures group to come inside, please? All right, you copy hounds.